The conversation nobody wants to have. You know, I was sitting in my favorite coffee shop last Tuesday morning, the same little place I've been going to for years, and something hit me that I wasn't expecting. I looked around at all the tables, saw couples chatting over their lattes, young parents juggling toddlers and smartphones, business people rushing in and out with their orders. And then I realized something that made my chest feel tight. I was the only person sitting alone, not just that morning, but most mornings, and not just at the coffee shop, but pretty much everywhere I go these days. Maybe you know that feeling. Maybe you've had that moment when you're standing in line at the grocery store, or sitting in your doctor's waiting room, or even just at home in the evening and it hits you like a wave. When did I become so alone? I want to talk to you today about something that nobody really prepares us for, something that doesn't get discussed at retirement parties or in those cheerful articles about successful aging. It's the loneliness that can creep into your life after 70, and how different it feels from anything you've experienced before. This isn't the kind of loneliness you felt when you were younger, when you were between relationships, or when you moved to a new city, or when you had a fight with a friend. This is something deeper, more persistent, and frankly, more frightening. Because when you're 75 and feeling lonely, you can't just tell yourself, "This is temporary, things will change." Sometimes it feels like this might be how the rest of your story goes. I need to tell you something important right up front. You're not imagining this, and you're not being dramatic. The loneliness that many of us experience after 70 is real. It's common, and it's actually different from the loneliness younger people feel. There are reasons for it that have nothing to do with your personality, your social skills, or your worth as a person. Let me share something that happened to my friend Dorothy. She's 78, lived in the same neighborhood for 40 years, raised 3 kids there, was active in the PTA, volunteered at the library, knew everyone on her street. Dorothy was never what you'd call a lonely person. She was the one organizing block parties and checking on neighbors when they were sick. But over the past 5 years, things started changing in ways she didn't see coming. Her husband passed away 3 years ago. Her best friend Helen moved to Florida to be near her daughter. The young family that moved into the house next door is perfectly nice, but they're busy with their own lives, work, kids, activities. They wave hello, but that's about it. Dorothy told me something last month that really stuck with me. She said, "I used to be somebody who mattered to people. People called me, needed me, included me in things. Now I feel like I'm just here, like I'm taking up space but not really part of anything anymore." That hit me hard because I recognized the feeling. It's not just about being alone. It's about feeling invisible, irrelevant, like the world is moving on without you. Here's what I've learned and what I want you to understand. This isn't your fault, and it's not a character flaw. After 70, loneliness often happens because of circumstances that are largely out of our control. Friends move away or pass away. Adult children get busy with their own families and careers. Neighbors change. The communities we were part of, maybe our workplace, our church, our volunteer organizations, might not be as central to our lives anymore. And here's the thing that really gets me. Our society doesn't talk about this honestly. We get all these messages about successful aging and staying active and positive thinking, but nobody talks about the fact that maintaining meaningful connections gets harder as we age, not easier. When you're younger, connections often happen naturally. You meet people at work, through your kids' activities, in your neighborhood. You have energy for socializing, for making plans, for maintaining friendships. But after 70, many of those natural connection points disappear, and making new friends. That's a skill most of us never really learned because we never had to. I remember my grandmother, God rest her soul, used to say that getting old wasn't for sissies. She was talking about the physical challenges, the health issues, the aches and pains. But I think she could have added that the emotional challenges are just as tough, maybe tougher. Because when your knee hurts, people understand that, they can see it, they sympathize, they ask how you're feeling. But when your heart hurts from loneliness, when you go days without having a real conversation with another human being, when you realize that if something happened to you, it might be days before anyone noticed, that's a pain that's harder to explain and harder for others to understand. I've been thinking a lot about why this happens, why so many of us find ourselves feeling isolated after 70. Part of it is just the math. The older we get, the smaller our circle of peers becomes. Friends pass away, develop health problems that limit their social activities, or move away to be closer to family. The generation younger than us is busy with careers and raising families. The generation older than us is getting smaller every year. But there's more to it than that. I think part of what makes loneliness after 70 so hard is that it often comes with a sense of loss, not just of people, but of purpose, of being needed, of having a role that matters. When you're raising children, you have a clear purpose every day. When you're working, you have colleagues who depend on you, projects that need your attention, a reason to get up and get dressed every morning. When you retire, when your kids are grown and busy with their own lives, when your friends start disappearing from your life one way or another, it's not just that you're alone more often, it's that you start wondering if you matter anymore. And that's a thought that can keep you awake at night, let me tell you. But here's what I want you to know, and what I wish someone had told me earlier. Feeling this way doesn't mean you are weak. It doesn't mean you're pathetic, and it doesn't mean you should just accept it as inevitable. The loneliness that comes after 70 is a challenge, yes, but it's not a life sentence. The truth about why this happens. Let me tell you about something that happened to my neighbor Frank that really opened my eyes to how quickly things can change. Frank is 72, retired from the post office after 35 years. For the first few years after retirement, he was great. He had his routines, coffee with the guys from work every Thursday, volunteering at the food bank on Saturdays, helping his daughter with yard work on weekends. Then, within the span of about 18 months, everything shifted. 2 of his Thursday coffee buddies moved to senior communities in other states. 1 passed away from a heart attack. His daughter's family moved across town for a better school district, so the weekend visits became less frequent. The food bank got a new coordinator who changed all the schedules around, and Frank felt like he didn't fit in with the new crowd. Frank went from having a full social calendar to having, well, not much of anything. And the worst part, it happened so gradually that he didn't really notice until he was already deep in it. That's how loneliness after 70 often works. It's not usually one dramatic event. It's a slow erosion, like water wearing away at stone. You don't wake up one morning and suddenly find yourself isolated. It happens bit by bit, relationship by relationship, until one day you realize that the phone hasn't rung in 3 days, and you can't remember the last time you had plans for the weekend. I've been talking to a lot of folks our age about this, and I'm starting to see some patterns in how this loneliness develops. One of the biggest factors is what I think of as the energy equation. When we were younger, we had the energy to maintain friendships that required effort. We'd drive across town for dinner parties, stay up late talking on the phone, make plans for the weekend even when we were tired from work. But as we age, our energy becomes more precious. We have to choose how to spend it more carefully. And unfortunately, maintaining social connections takes energy. Physical energy to get dressed and go out. Emotional energy to engage with other people. Mental energy to remember names and follow conversations. So we start making choices. Maybe we skip the church social because we're tired. Maybe we don't call our friend back right away because we don't feel like talking today. Maybe we turn down an invitation because it feels like too much effort. And before we know it, we've created a pattern of social withdrawal that's hard to break. There's another thing happening that I don't think we talk about enough. After 70, many of us start dealing with what I call invisible disabilities. Maybe your hearing isn't what it used to be, so group conversations become difficult to follow. Maybe you have trouble with names or faces, so social situations become embarrassing. Maybe you don't drive at night anymore, so evening activities are out of reach. These changes affect our social lives in ways that other people don't always understand. My friend Margaret stopped going to her book club not because she lost interest in reading, but because her hearing loss made it hard to follow the discussion. She was too embarrassed to keep asking people to repeat themselves, so she just stopped going. The book club members probably think she got bored with the group, but the truth is, she misses it terribly. And then there's the grief factor. By the time you reach 70, you've likely experienced significant losses. Maybe you've buried a spouse, lost close friends, said goodbye to siblings. Each loss doesn't just take away that person. It often takes away the social connections that came with them. When your spouse dies, you might lose touch with the couples you used to socialize with. When your best friend passes away, you might lose contact with her extended family and friend group. Grief changes you too. It can make social situations feel hollow or meaningless. Small talk becomes harder when you're carrying a heavy heart. Celebrations can feel forced when you're missing someone important. Some people withdraw, not because they don't want company, but because being around others highlights their loss. Here's something else I've noticed. Technology was supposed to make staying connected easier, but for many of us, it's actually made things more complicated. Our kids and grandkids communicate through texts and social media, but many of us still prefer a phone call or a face-to-face conversation. We end up feeling even more disconnected because we're not communicating in the same ways as the people we want to stay close to. I tried to join Facebook a few years ago because everyone said it would help me stay in touch with family, but honestly, scrolling through all those posts and pictures just made me feel more isolated, not less. Everyone else's life looked so busy and interesting, and I felt like I had nothing worth sharing. So I stopped using it, which probably made my family think I wasn't interested in their lives, when the truth was the opposite. There's also what I think of as the relevance problem. When you're working, when you're raising children, when you're actively involved in your community, you feel needed. People come to you for advice, for help, for your perspective. But as you age, especially if you're dealing with health issues or mobility problems, you can start to feel like more of a burden than a contributor. I hear this from so many people our age. I don't want to be a bother. We stop reaching out because we're afraid we're imposing. We don't ask for help because we don't want to inconvenience anyone. We don't share our problems because we don't want to bring others down. But in trying to be considerate, we often end up cutting ourselves off from the very connections we need most. The truth is, loneliness after 70 is often a perfect storm of circumstances. Physical changes that make socializing harder, emotional losses that leave gaps in our social networks, energy limitations that make it harder to maintain relationships, technological changes that alter how people communicate, and societal attitudes that can make us feel less relevant or important. Understanding these factors doesn't make the loneliness go away, but it does help explain why it's so common and why it's not your fault. You're not lonely because you're unlikable or antisocial. You're lonely because you're navigating a stage of life that presents unique social challenges, and our society doesn't provide much guidance for how to handle them. But recognizing the problem is the first step toward addressing it. Finding your way back to connection. I want to tell you about something that happened to me about 6 months ago that changed my whole perspective on this loneliness thing. I was having one of those particularly rough days. You know the kind, where the silence in your house feels heavy and the phone never rings and you start wondering if anyone would notice if you just disappeared. I was feeling pretty sorry for myself when I remembered something my father used to say. He'd tell me, "Son, when you're in a hole, the first thing to do is stop digging." I realized that day that I'd been digging my own hole deeper without even realizing it. See, I'd gotten into the habit of saying no to things, invitations, phone calls, opportunities to get out of the house. I told myself I was being realistic about my energy levels, or that I didn't want to be a burden, or that I just wasn't in the mood. But the truth was, I was scared. Scared of being awkward, scared of not fitting in, scared of being reminded of how much my social world had shrunk. That day, I made a decision that probably saved my sanity. I was going to start saying yes again. Not to everything, but to something. And I was going to stop waiting for other people to reach out to me first. The first thing I did was call my old friend Bill. We'd worked together for years, used to be pretty close, but we'd drifted apart after retirement. I almost hung up 3 times before he answered. When he picked up, I just said, "Bill, this is going to sound crazy, but I miss talking to you. Do you want to get coffee sometime?" Folks over 60, you know what he said? "Thank God you called. I've been thinking the same thing for months, but I didn't know if you'd want to hear from me." That conversation taught me something important. Other people are lonely too. They're waiting for someone to make the first move, just like you are. Sometimes all it takes is one person being brave enough to pick up the phone. But I learned something else important too. Rebuilding connections after 70 requires a different approach than making friends when you're younger. When you're young, friendships often grow out of shared circumstances. You work together, your kids are in the same class, you live in the same neighborhood. After 70, you have to be more intentional about it. I started looking for what I call low-pressure connection opportunities, places where I could be around people without the pressure of having to perform or be particularly social. I started going to the library regularly, not just to get books, but to be around other people. I'd sit in the reading area, maybe nod hello to the other regulars, sometimes strike up a brief conversation about a book or the weather. It sounds small, but those little interactions started to matter. The librarian began recognizing me, asking about books I was returning. I started recognizing other regular visitors. One day, an older gentleman asked if I'd seen a particular author's new book, and we ended up having a 20-minute conversation about mystery novels. Nothing earth-shattering, but it felt good to connect with another person over something we both enjoyed. I also started volunteering again, but I chose something different this time. Instead of trying to recreate what I'd done before, I found something that matched who I am now. I started reading to kids at the elementary school once a week. It's just an hour. It doesn't require me to be on socially, but it gives me a sense of purpose and connection that I'd been missing. Here's what I want you to understand. You don't have to completely transform your social life overnight. You don't have to become a social butterfly or force yourself into situations that don't feel right. But you do have to take some action, even if it's small. Maybe it's calling one old friend, even if you haven't talked in months. Maybe it's joining a senior center activity, even if you only go once to try it out. Maybe it's striking up a conversation with a neighbor you usually just wave to. Maybe it's volunteering for something, even if it's just a few hours a month. The key is to start somewhere and to be patient with yourself. After 70, social connections often develop more slowly than they used to. You might not feel an instant bond with new people, but that doesn't mean those connections aren't valuable. Sometimes the most important relationships are the ones that grow gradually, based on regular, low-key interactions rather than intense emotional bonds. I've also learned to redefine what friendship looks like at this stage of life. When I was younger, friendship meant frequent contact, deep conversations, shared activities. Now I appreciate different kinds of connections. The man at the hardware store who always asks about my garden project. The woman at the gym who spots me at the weight machines. The couple I see walking their dog every evening who always stops to chat. These aren't intimate friendships, but they're connections. They're people who know my name, who would notice if I wasn't around for a while, who add warmth and humanity to my days. And you know what? That matters more than I used to think it did. I want to be honest with you. Some days are still hard. Some evenings are still quiet. Some weekends still feel long. The loneliness doesn't disappear completely just because you start making an effort to connect with people. But it becomes more manageable. It stops feeling like a life sentence and starts feeling like a challenge you can work on. And here's something beautiful I've discovered. When you make an effort to reach out to others, you often find out that you're not the only one who's been feeling isolated. You end up helping other people as much as you're helping yourself. There's something powerful about realizing that your friendship, your conversation, your presence actually matters to someone else. You've lived a full life. You have stories to tell, wisdom to share, and love to give. The world needs what you have to offer, even if it doesn't always feel that way. Sometimes it just takes a little courage to put yourself back out there and remind the world and yourself that you're still here, you still matter, and you still have connections to make. Your story isn't over. This chapter might feel lonely sometimes, but it doesn't have to be the final word.